Well, Nipun, thanks for joining us today at ADAPT's Data Edge event here in Sydney. And when you think about building the data-driven organisation, what does that entail?
Data-driven team means a lot of things to a lot of people. I like to call it a little more data-enabled. Data-driven means you're just aligning yourselves with whatever data is telling you. And I like the enablement part just purely because it does bring your intuition and gut into the picture, but you're verifying that intuition and gut based on the data. So you verify your gut and intuition, and then you say, I'm actually able to make that decision. Now, as a data-driven organization, I do believe it's a very broad area, and I call it a suitcase term, you can actually almost say. But a data-driven organization to me is where people can actually look at data, understand data, and have an impact of an outcome built on data and not really just on personal intuitions on basic agendas. I myself, I'm a student of neuro-economics and psychology. I love the philosophy of decision making. And data is one part of that decision-making process because there's a lot of cognition that goes into it, a lot of biases that goes into it. So how can you understand those and eliminate those to actually make a data-driven organization? Mm-hmm. And those are the things we are currently working on.
And I like how you referred to it almost when we think about enablement through data, through curiosity, almost like that suitcase, and we can pick out that cognition, we can pick out those skills, but we can also pick out the empathy, biases, and relevance and completeness of the data we have in our hands. And when we think about enabling our people to become data literate, but also curious and led by hypotheses to understand what the data is actually telling us, what are some of the challenges and what do you find works?
I think skill enablement is one of the major aspects when you're looking at the lowest level. I think of literacy at three different levels. I think of literacy as the people who are working with data day in, day out. So they need to obviously assess the information, they need the right understanding of the tool, what the data quality is, where it comes from. So all those aspects become part of the data literacy aspect. And then obviously to create a story which has to be curiously created. It does not mean it has to be a good story. It's like what's good about it and what's bad about it. And do we know both? Can we do something about it? But that's more at the base level. Then I believe the next layer also happens where a business or a business management team looks at that information provided by the analyst and say, what does this actually means to the process or the things that we do today? And that's pretty much looking at, if I have to say, that's looking at all the history of information that has been provided, the flow of information that has come in the past, and saying, can we do something better with this? So that's the second. And the third is, again, the business and the exec and the C-suite to actually look at that information and say, we know what has happened, we know what we are doing on a day-to-day basis. What is it that we want to achieve in the future, and how do I decide based on the information on hand, is it worth doing or not? Mm-hmm. So it's those three levels of literacy that we talk about. We are, as part of the organization, we are very much creating that under the base layer, because if you have consistent skills across business functions, data teams, and they are talking about similar stuff in a much more independent way, the collaboration becomes better. If it's not, if people are talking at different skills and different understanding, you tend to start still creating some silos, because sometimes it's about confidence, not sharing because you're not confident what you're doing. And secondly, sometimes it's about power. Let me just keep it myself. Mm-hmm. I'll continue doing what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So, but having that same base across does help. Mm-hmm. And we're working very much on the learning of that skill from business as well as from tools.
And so what that kind of sort of layered approach makes me think about is how we create an effective platform for our data, not only to empower our workforce, our leaders, and ultimately to the C and executive suite as well. But then we're thinking about data as a product, not just as a thing to be consumed. So when we think about that sort of product mindset, it's then thinking about that life cycle of where the data came from originally, how it's been processed within our organisation, but also around the ecosystem as well. And when you think about trying to take those platform and product approaches to improving data literacy, data culture, but also data enablement for our people as well, what are some tips that you can share with the community?
I think one of the, for data culture is a habit. So habit is what creates environment, and environment creates the culture, right? So it has to be inculcated from the top. It can't just happen from bottom up. It has to be driven from the top. And that is where I said the literacy has to follow and flow. One of the key things I think what we have realized is bring in the data with true quality, just because of the trust. If the business is involved while bringing the data, and I believe in the data ops philosophy, which is a combination of a bit of agile, lean manufacturing, and it just helps if you start thinking of your data outputs as a factory. And we have tried to apply that to certain places. When the data comes in as a raw material and then you bring it out, there are different people involved as part of this. The more you get them involved in the first place, it does help. So if you're looking for an output, an analytical output from a business action insights perspective, and they come to you, you got to get involved them from the process of ingesting where, how, what, make them the owner of those parts. Usually a technical team becomes the owner, but they are the execution people, and they make sure the execution is done well, but you should always have a business owner to those aspects. So I think that makes the quality better, trust better, and the eventual outcome and adoption better. It also creates a trust above, that it's not an IT thing or a technology thing that this data is now produced and this asset is available to consume. It's a collaboration. So I love the, I think it's a Databricks saying, data is a team sport, and it is a team sport, and at different layers, different players are important. A midfielder is as important as a forward person. A goalkeeper is as important as a person who's scoring a goal. So as long as you know the roles across the organization and you identify those key players, I think it works.
Yeah. And when I think about some of those themes, it's like, an orchestra playing a symphony. You've got the conductor up front, the brass, the wind, the percussion, all coming together to create that rich and nuanced tune. And so we've talked about the art of the possible. We've talked about that platform mindset, getting many hands making light and rich work. But what are some of the challenges?
Governance. Hands down, governance. It has been one of the, again, I've been in the industry for quite some time now, and it's one of the boring topics. You don't really get the buy-in to take data governance as initiatives. It's sometimes hard, let's put it that way, it's because you want to give results quick. You want the next step to be done quickly. But I think data governance as a mindset has to change, and it's changing, evolving, and that's again part of literacy. Historically, when I was a developer, I will get some requirements. Somebody will define their requirements and they give it to me. I will create those requirements and I'll give the report, they'll test it, they'll say it's all good. Why would business spend time in saying who's this, what's the purpose of this and all of that, because they've got what they wanted. But now you have to think governance in a very different way, because it's in that manufacturing pipeline, it's the quality checks. Who owns that step? So now the analytics is in a data democratized world, in a self-service world, the governance is more and more important because you want to define it. You want to show the lineage. You want to say who's the owner. You don't want to create modern day silos, because if everybody is developing the same thing over and over, it's again creating silos and copies. So I think governance is again as much as it is important for a technology team, it is more important to create that data democratization and analytics at the edge.
So it's about the purpose, it's about the why, it's doing the right things for the right reasons, it's making sure that as we build for the now, we're not creating debt for the future, legacy debt, but
Absolutely.
also driving for modularity and replaceability so that we can evolve as our understanding across the organisation evolves as well. And if there was one thing that you were going to leave with the ADAPT community, what would it be?
Well, I'll say work on your communication and personal skills. You need a lot of collaboration across the business, and a technology person is not at all a technology anymore. He needs to be, or she needs to be, a business person. Same for a business person, they need to be a technology people. And when you think about a data strategy or in a bigger picture, you got to think about two versions of the truth, which I kind of believe that once your fundamentals, your qualities, your ops, your policies and your governance is in play happens. Again, two-speed economy, again, defense versus offensive. But as an organization, you always have a single point of truth, and you should strive for that. But that single point of truth for purpose-driven purposes can have multiple variants of it. But it's built for purpose, and that is required for the innovation. So as long as people understand that you don't have to always work on one version, there is a purpose-built version for it, and it works, it's all good.